The good Paul Ryan from Common Cause drops by to tell us what we can do to hold Trump accountable. Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe to our channel. Paul Ryan is with us, not that one. Paul Ryan, this Paul S. Ryan is the Vice President of Policy and Litigation at Common Cause. He's the good Paul Ryan. CommonCause.org is the website. And Paul, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks
for joining us. So you guys issued a press release saying that despite Mitch McConnell, Congress must hold the Trump administration accountable for, turning over information, for what Bill Barr is up to, all these kind of things. You want to quickly make that point?
Sure. I mean, at this point, we're talking about contempt proceedings. We're urging Congress to hold Bill Barr in contempt. There are others who are likewise worthy of contempt proceedings. And the House is considering such a contempt resolution against Attorney General Barr right now, this afternoon.
Right. Now, when Eric Holder refused to turn over Fast and Furious documents to a Republican-led House committee, knowing that they were going to publicize them and risk the agency, the ATF agency programs, he refused to do it. He felt that it was a partisan witch hunt. He was held in contempt, and my recollection is that litigation took years, which, in my opinion, is exactly what Trump is counting on, that this is going to end up in the courts. And it's going to have to go through a couple of levels of court until it gets to the Supreme Court, or maybe even go straight to the Supreme Court. But bottom line is, he thinks he can make this thing last until after November 2020, and after that, it won't matter. What say you?
Well, I'm not naive. Common Cause, my colleagues here at Common Cause are not naive. We acknowledge that the contempt process itself is unsatisfactory, but it's what we've got, and we think it's really important for members of Congress to do their job, regardless of gaming out what the consequences or the outcomes might be down the road. There are a couple different types of contempt proceedings available to Congress. The way that the Holder contempt proceedings went was into civil court, and you're entirely correct. I mean, the litigation took years, and in fact, although Holder was ordered to turn over some documents, he was not ordered to turn over others that Congress wanted. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, took office in 2017, and then it was his DOJ. And he cut deals with Congress to provide them with the documents they had been seeking for years.
On Fast and Furious?
Yes.
So that didn't get resolved for, half a decade. The flip side of this is that John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General for Richard Nixon, went to prison for 19 months for lying to Congress. We've seen at least one clear and several probable areas where Bill Barr has lied to Congress, and I'm talking the modern era. I'm not talking about his lies to Congress back in the 90s. It seems if the tables were turned, that the Republicans would not be going for let's just say that he's in contempt. Instead, they'd be, we're going to lock his ass up. Why don't we do that?
Well, for one of the reasons that this is unlikely to turn out that way is that there's a big difference between perjury, for which you cannot assert executive privilege as a shield, and withholding documents, refusing to comply with subpoenas, which is what Bill Barr is doing, what Congress is talking about today. And right. President Trump has explicitly now, as of today, asserted executive privilege over those documents. It's the scope of that executive privilege that is what would get hashed out in court. It's the assertion of executive privilege that will enable Attorney General Barr and everyone underneath him, including the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, to simply refuse to prosecute Barr for contempt in a criminal contempt proceeding. That's why, that practice, the unwillingness of the Department of Justice to criminally prosecute a congressional contempt citation goes all the way back to the 1980s in the Reagan administration, at least. And that's what leaves us in the civil law enforcement context here. But a prosecution for perjury, that's a whole different kettle of fish, and it is not subject to assertion of executive privilege as a shield.
Right. Do you know how John Mitchell ended up in jail?
I don't know.
It was a continuously Republican administration. It happened during the Jerry Ford administration, that prosecution. Although maybe, I guess I need to talk to somebody who knows about that. But I think the largest issue here, Paul Ryan, is the question of what this has done to America. You look at, for example, the Roman Republic, after Julius Caesar was assassinated, and after the fall of the triumvirate, basically, when Augustus declared his, absolute emperorship over Rome, that was the end of a 500-year-long democracy, a republic, and the beginning of another 1,400 years of being an empire. Is it possible that if the Supreme Court backs up Donald Trump on this, and I think that there's a good chance that they will. You've got a couple of members, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, who are on the record as being in favor of, the unitary executive theory, if the president really is a king, that this presidency being done by, an incompetent bumbler, basically, who's trying to hide the fact that he's got a past as a grifter and a liar, that he is, through his incompetence, not doing the kinds of things that you would have expected from somebody like Mussolini or Hitler, who were actually competent people. But what he has done is he has shown where the holes are. He has shown where the cracks are. He has shown where a truly competent autocrat, compared to Trump as an incompetent autocrat, a truly competent autocrat, the next Republican president who gets in, could easily say, okay, that's it. It's the end of the republic. I mean, Jimmy Carter on this program 3 years ago said, we're no longer a democracy, we're now an oligarchy. He was not speaking tongue-in-cheek, but he felt that it was still possible to pull back from it. Is it possible that this administration is doing lasting, permanent damage to our republic in a way that we may not recover from?
It's very possible, or likely even. I think that many of the actions of President Trump and his enablers, including Attorney General Barr, they pose a serious threat to democratic order, the constitutional order of this nation. And one of the bedrock principles of government in the United States is that no one is above the law. We thought that until Donald Trump entered the White House, at least. But Donald Trump is really pushing that boundary. He's really trying to break that very simple rule and demonstrate to the public, to the world, that he is above the law, that he can get away with anything he wants. If that turns out to be true, that will be a very lasting, very serious bit of damage to our constitutional order.
To a large extent, didn't that start with John Mitchell, with the Nixon White House, when the Nixon Department of Justice, the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice, wrote a memo creating a rule, which is not law, but it's policy, I suppose, saying that we, the head cops in the United States, the Department of Justice, we will not indict a sitting president?
Yeah, and I think I want to underscore one aspect of what you just said. It's not a law. It is an opinion that was generated within the Department of Justice, and it needs to be challenged. It needs to be pressed, because anytime you're talking about a separation of powers issue, executive branch versus Congress versus the courts, each branch is going to claim as much power to themselves as they can get away with. And the opinion you just cited, the DOJ won't prosecute the head of the DOJ, namely the president. It's an example of that. It's an example of the executive branch claiming as much power as it possibly can. And
so how do we respond to that?
In Congress.
I mean, should Congress pass a law that says just, a one-sentence law that says no person is above the law? Do we need to amend the Constitution? Is this, I mean, you had two Democratic presidents, Clinton and well, three. You had Carter, Clinton, and Obama, who all had an opportunity to reverse that DOJ opinion and didn't do so. I can understand why Clinton didn't, because he was being held to account by the Republicans in a way that could have been criminal. But I don't understand why neither Carter nor Obama did, unless they just never imagined in their wildest dreams that we'd be in a situation we're in right now.
Well, in the short term, the remedy to this problem that's enshrined in the Constitution is the impeachment process itself. And right. I want to be clear, Common Cause has not yet called for the impeachment of President Trump. It's a national governing board level decision. Our board hasn't gone there yet. But the process that exists to check a rogue executive, a rogue president, a rogue Department of Justice is the impeachment process, and that's fully within the hands of Congress. And it would require, to be certain, it would require some Republicans in the Senate to put country over party I don't know if we have Republicans in the Senate willing to do that, but
not so
there
far.
is a process. We haven't, not so far. That's
yeah,
right.
I mean, you had two. You had Bob Corker and Jeff Flake, and they both left. They were driven out by these guys. Final question. We're talking with Paul S. Ryan, the Vice President for Policy and Litigation and Common Cause. Paul, I asked you about lasting damage to our republic, to the infrastructure, the superstructure of our nation itself, our Republican government, and a small r, our democracy, if you will. What specifically, we have just a minute to the break, what specifically is Common Cause, or what would you, as an attorney and an authority on this stuff, recommend that we be looking at as ways to repair the damage or plug the holes that Trump has exposed in our legal system, in the structure of our government?
A very short answer, but a very comprehensive response is H.R. 1, the bill that was passed by the House this year that crosses many different policy areas of our democracy: voting rights, money in politics, ethics, with solutions to many of the most fundamental problems with our democracy today.
But H.R. 1 has been shot down by Mitch McConnell.
It has been, and with every good piece of reform legislation that's ever passed, it's been a multi-year battle. So Common Cause will continue fighting for H.R. 1, and it's going to take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but we're going to keep fighting.